Apple Intelligence. Now, I'll admit, Steve, when it's a couple of weeks now. We've had a couple of weeks to digest, what Apple announced. I'll admit I was not keen when they said Apple Intelligence because it was a bit cute, repurposing the AI, letters there to, suit their marketing term. Um, the one thing I will say is that I think they really nailed their approach to AI, but as we'll get into in a minute, we're not going to be seeing it for a while, despite what they may have suggested on stage. But I think the idea that a lot of it is done on device. A lot of it is around they're still taking that well, it's not going to be full privacy, but they're definitely leaning into the idea that it's not going to compromise users' privacy, which has been a tenet of theirs for, forever. That it's the idea being that your tool is the AI tools are actually on the device, and they've got the devices that are capable of doing it. Obviously, the caveat was that for the iPhone you have to have a 15 Pro or later, which is like you might as well, I'm still not going to upgrade for that. But one good thing is that the last couple of years of Macs that have Apple Silicon can run it when it eventually gets here. So I don't know what your impressions of it, Steve, but I thought it was actually a pretty good expression of their approach to it, especially considering that the approaches of some of the other big tech companies have kind of, I don't know if you'd call it they not stoking fears, but they didn't allay any fears about the tech to the consumer, or maybe they weren't as clear about the implications of what they're doing or how it's going to work, etc.
Well, I think this is just classic Apple in terms of like creating and mastering a narrative. We hear about AI on devices all the time now. We hear about NVIDIA. We hear about Copilot. We hear about Chat GPT, and it's going to change your life. And, now it's going to be on our devices and everyone's going to have it. But that narrative is not one I understand. That narrative I've not been able to pick through and understand why a Windows laptop with AI is going to help me, how it's going to help me, and how it's even going to protect me from like just stripping even more data and just spreading it around the internet. Apple's narrative does all of that. In fact, I have to say, I was highly cynical, and maybe I'm cynical actually on what we'll achieve through Apple Intelligence in the short term, but at least I understood what they were offering, and I understood, their approach to AI, and it made sense. And I've got an M1 chip, so I'll be able to adopt it. The only thing they sort of caught me on was I didn't realize I'd be waiting another year before I could use it. But I thought it was here, and I thought it was now, and I thought it was very clever.
Absolutely. One thing I did want to touch on was that the moment in the keynote where they were talking about not integration with like services like ChatGPT, etc., but that if you were to run into a wall with Apple Intelligence on your device and you needed more, like you needed to access a service that had more access to general world information like ChatGPT, they would give you the option to, sign up or sign in through ChatGPT on your device. But they went to great pains to say, you're going to do it through our browser. We're going to give you warnings every time that you go in there that it might not necessarily be 100% safe because it's going to an external provider, etc. And I just thought that was really interesting too because ChatGPT or OpenAI have, taken the world by storm from a media perspective in terms of being at the forefront of generative AI, etc. And Apple seem to have gone well out of their way to say, no, those guys are off on the side. Stay in our nice little, little playground we've got here. But if you really need to use that service, yeah, we're going to provide a little bit of a back door. But just, there's some warning signs if you go through that door that it might not be safe out there.
Well, that's right. And none of the other AI, functions or functionality across the broad spectrum of tools and approaches has offered that. And I mean, we've already questioned this ourselves. And And of course, it's very well known that you need to be quite careful when you use ChatGPT for work. You can't really put any confidential information in there because no one really knows where it goes. I sometimes wonder with some of the answers I get back from ChatGPT that somebody's putting some very detailed stuff in there because there's no way ChatGPT could make that stuff up. So, you know, I think the Apple approach to putting the AI function on your device and giving you the option, if that's not enough, to go to the larger resource is so clear. It makes you understand how AI works, and it makes you understand actually how the Apple products work. I mean, you know, I certainly have no idea how Copilot works, but then that's no big deal because I've got no idea how Windows works.
Absolutely, absolutely. One of the I think that this is a good flex for their hardware too. I think, you know, because essentially it's saying that, you know, it's because of our Apple Silicon devices that you know, we can power all of this stuff, and I thought that was interesting from that perspective as well. And it also makes you wonder where it'll go in the future in terms of they might start beefing up their specs now because, you know, like it was interesting that when all the Windows stuff came out, you know, the month before, and all of their Surface devices came out with a minimum of 16 gigs of RAM as a baseline. And as we know, you know, Apple starts their laptops at 8, and you know, there's been a lot of online chatter about how that's you know, substandard, even though Apple says, yeah, but our 8 gigs works like 16 gigs on a Windows machine. I mean, they can only go so far with that narrative.
Yeah, but that's always been the case.
Absolutely, but it'll be interesting once it comes out. I'm certainly not going to upgrade to any new device to take advantage of it, especially knowing that it's not going to. I think the vast majority of the significant things that they were announcing aren't going to come out for at least a year, and not with iOS 18 and you know, the next Mac OS, etc.
Yeah, which lends me to just a question I have, which I'm sure no one will ever be able to answer with any accuracy. But how long have Apple been thinking this through around AI and how that included on their machines? I mean, I suspect it must have been a reasonable amount of time, but in reality, it's probably not that much amount of time, maybe a couple of years. But they certainly seem to have seen the future and really to incorporate the AI, I think, into the OS, which is where it looks like it's going, as opposed to incorporating it into individual bits of software that run on the OS, you know. And having said that, though, I don't know enough about what Windows is doing, but it seems to be more in their products than in their OS.
Oh, well, at the very least, if we get a version of Siri that actually works, now that's a way. We'll take that as a win, as far as all that's concerned.
I mean, AI works, but yes, I'm yet to find a way to be integrated into a system where it works. So that for me is the where I think Apple's going, and they always pretty much manage to get their systems right. So this will be really interesting when we see, I think, you know, this next generation of Apple Intelligence, or the new generation of Apple Intelligence.
Absolutely. Just finally, I did want to have a bit of a dig at the iPad again. I think we talked about that an episode or two ago, that you know, the iPad is spectacular from a hardware perspective, but it just isn't being taken advantage of by iPad OS, the version of iOS that runs on the iPad, which is almost ostensibly the same thing. And it's curious because iOS 18 comes with you know, a lot of new features, although Android users will laugh because, you know, the features they're introducing have been on Android for years, and it's only now just coming to the iPhone. But all those features are going to be on the iPad. But if you take all of that out, it seems that the features specific to the iPad are even more anemic than what they even were last year on a year-on-year basis, and so we had this discussion the other week, the other episode, which was, aside from the base iPad, that's $600, or maybe something like the iPad Mini because it's smaller and portable. Why are you spending more money for an iPad at this point? Because the base iPad is going to do 95% of what the iPad Pro can do at less than half the cost of what the iPad Pro is. And that's the bit that do they know what they're doing, like the direction that the iPad's going? Because I know they keep saying, you get the Craig Federighi types who'll say, no, you have your Mac and your iPad and they work really well together. So, I guess the implication being you got to have both of them, and $10,000 later or whatever after you've spent all your money. But I just don't know if, from a narrative perspective or even a concept perspective, if they know where, at least the higher end of where the iPad is supposed to be. I think the Steve Jobs definition of it when it was first announced, when he went up on stage and announced what it should be, is perfectly replicated in the base iPad. It's there's an argument in the iPad Mini, even though Steve Jobs wasn't into the iPad Mini and he probably would never have allowed it. But the iPad Mini serves that purpose as well, and I know that because I use one. It's a great tablet. But once you start to get to the iPad Air with the now M2 chip, and you've got the iPad Pro with the M4 chip, what are you using it for to get that will take advantage of all of that? Other than, unless, I don't really know, but I know the base iPad can edit 4K video just fine. And and for my use case, that would probably be the upper end of what I'd be pushing it with. What type of app? Is there an app on the App Store that would take advantage of the M4 in the iPad Pro? That's the bit, it's a conundrum, and I just wonder if they're thinking about that in terms of longevity.
I think you're right, Ben. I think you're right, but I expect that's where Apple Intelligence will step in, because I think we've always spoken about the difficulty of really using the iPad Pro to its full limit, because it's limited by iOS. And I suspect that Apple Intelligence means it'll have power to do a lot of things beyond what the iOS limits now.
And I guess that's a nice way to button up the whole discussion, that it seems that, and Apple being clever, I guess, with this, is that they're going to use Apple Intelligence as a massive new feature set that will drive more hardware sales into the future, because I think they'd sort of run to a point where I think they were kind of getting close to the limits of what is currently done on these devices. And now with AI and its excessive more demands on hardware, now they've got a new thing to take them forward for the next 10 years.
I agree. The way I feel about the iPad series at the moment is quite reminiscent of where they were before the silicon generation of chips.
Yeah, absolutely.